As they reached the orphanage, the first thing Ryan got was a smack by Mrs. Park for not visiting often. She introduced Taehyung to Mrs. Park and other kids. Later, when the kids and Taehyung were off to sleep, it was just Ryan and Mrs. Park. She told her how Taehyung had lost everything. Mrs. Park, being a kind lady who saw Ryan as her own daughter, told her not to worry and stay as long as she wanted. Now it had been a week since Taehyung and Ryan had moved into the orphanage, and slowly things began to shift. At first, Taehyung struggled. He wasn't used to the sounds of the children running through the halls or the small, cramped space he now called home. The simplicity of life here was a sharp contrast to the luxurious life he once led. But there was something about the orphanage, about its warmth, the innocence of the children, and the quiet strength of Mrs. Park that slowly began to work its into him. During the day, Ryan would leave for her job as a teacher, her absence leaving Taehyung alone to figure out his place in this new world. Without much choice, Taehyung got up and followed her inside. At first, it felt strange, scrubbing floors and washing dishes. One afternoon, little Suni, the same girl who had been so excited to see Ryan, sat down beside Taehyung with a small book in her hands. Can you read this to me? He asked, her eyes big and hopeful. Taehyung hesitated for a moment, then took the book from her. All right, he said, his voice softer than usual. As he began reading, the kids gathered around, leaning against him, their heads resting on his arms or legs as they listened intently. But every time they returned to the orphanage, they were greeted by a heartwarming sight. The children would be gathered in a small living room, laughing, playing, and sometimes singing. One of the older boys, Min Seok, had a beat up old guitar and he often played simple melodies while the younger children sang along. It wasn't luxurious by any means. The couches were worn, the walls faded, but the atmosphere was warm, almost magical. Taehyung would stand in the doorway with Ryan watching as the children sang, their voices echoing through the small space. The children began to look up to him, trusting him, seeking out for comfort or advice, and Mrs. Park. She had become something like a mother to him. She scolded him when he slacked off, praised him when he did well, and most importantly, made him feel like he belonged. She knew how hard his fall from grace had been, and she wanted to give him the space to heal at his own pace. Hannah giggled, her cheeks glowing. Well, I've been planning my wedding, right? It's in a few months, and I wanted to invite you, but that's not the big news. It's a really high level position, Ryan. The previous manager retired, and they are having a hard time filing in the spot. When Seojun mentioned it, I immediately thought of you and Taehyung. It's not the CEO position he's used to, but it's a high ranking role, and he's more than qualified. Plus, Seojun's company is doing really well. It could be a fresh start for you both. Van nodded slowly, her mind racing. Okay, give me the details. Hannah quickly flashed out a business card from her bag and handed it to Vian. But she knew they had to talk. She stepped forward, her presence catching Taehyung's attention. He glanced up at her and smiled softly, the children too engrossed in his song to notice the exchange. Hey, Vian said, keeping her tone light. Let's go for a walk. Taehyung nodded and stood up, quietly excusing himself from the group. They stepped outside into the cold evening air, the sky painted with the fading hues of sunset. The walk to the garden was silent until, "What's on your mind?" Taehyung asked, his hand slipping into his pockets. I'm not forcing you, Tae. I know things have been hard, and I know I don't want to pressurize you into something. But I also know that how much you miss working. You were so good at what you did, and maybe this could be a chance for you to start fresh. No expectations, just think about it. Taehyung finally took the card from her, turning it over in his hands as he read the name of the company and the contact information. His expression remained neutral, but Ryan could sense the wheels turning in his mind. Taehyung looked down at her, his eyes softening. There was a vulnerability in him that she hadn't seen before, a quiet uncertainty that came from losing everything he had once thought was important. Taehyung softly pulled her towards himself, wrapping his arms around her shoulder into a warm hug. He exhaled in comfort. Vian's eyes in shock, her heart going crazy. Her body froze at his touch. Her scent filling in her nose, it relaxed her. Really? I ask her tomorrow only. She giggled in happiness, and Taehyung couldn't help but chuckle at her excitement. Let's go back inside, Tae said, looping her arm through his. I think Minseok's about to break out into another song, and I wouldn't want you to miss that. Van chuckled softly, allowing him to lead her back inside as they re entered the orphanage, the warmth of the place wrapping around them like a familiar embrace. It wasn't the life they had imagined, but it was theirs, and for now, that was enough.